So welcome to 100 Days In with me, Will Hall. This is the podcast where let's stop that. Welcome to series 5 of 100 Days In. It is 4 more series than I imagined doing, and I want to do this for a long, long time. We're talking years and years, hopefully. My first guest is an absolute cracker. What I would say here is most founders, when they start a company, their aim, I think all of them in their head, is to eventually sell it for a large sum. The big valuation at the end. The truth is, very few of them do that. But one person that did is my next guest, Cara, who founded a company called Plenish. Plenish are a cold press juice brand. That is what they're very well known for. But they now have branched into almond milks, nut milks of all kinds. But what I would say is that Plenish, for so many years after Cara created it, no one cared. No one cared for years and years. It was so expensive versus its competitors. People just didn't understand the brand. So we look back now and we think, yes, obviously it's done well. It's a great brand. But it wasn't like that for almost all of its life. Also, want to focus on the beginning, and that is the primary aim of the podcast. How did she start the company? Plenish was the intersection between the frustration in Cara's life in relation to her health, discovering cold pressed juice, and then understanding the value of cold pressed juice in the form of a diet. It is the intersection between her frustration in her life and discovering cold pressed juice and realizing the benefits she could get from it. That is how Plenish was born. So, Cara, again, thanks for your time. Unbelievable conversation. So without further ado, are you sitting comfortably? If so, we shall begin. Let's get on with it.
I don't think it's fair to ask that question because I don't believe it exists. I also had seen the future a little bit in what was going on in the US. If you really believe that you can add value to someone's life by them having your product or your service, then why would you be scared about asking? Actually, you're doing them a favor. 400 times more no's than there are yeses. Every single retail buyer said no.
Anyway, but Cara, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate the time zone's a bit different, so it's a bit later where I am versus you. But yeah, I'm just very excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for bringing me on.
I think sometimes, a bit like starting a business, the first question is sometimes the hardest, and I always toy over what to ask first. But I think some context would be really useful. So I was wondering, I suppose, just summarizing your earlier life and your working life, and then leading into what were the components that led up to you wanting to actually create Plenish in the first place?
Sure. Well, as you can tell by my accent, although I lived in London for 15 years, I am American. I grew up in New York City. And I mean, I always had an interest in health and well-being, but my first career was actually in retail. I studied marketing and business at Tulane University in New Orleans. And I always had a real love and passion for print magazines. I devoured them. I read them cover to cover. I loved the photos as a kid. I was posting them up on the wall. And I interned at magazines at like W when I was in university. And when I was graduating, it was my plan to go work in magazine publishing at Condé Nast Hearst, but I ended up getting recruited by Bloomingdale's, one of the big fashion retailers, and they were paying double the money than the starter salaries at magazines, and ended up going to work as a buyer for Bloomingdale's. Wasn't for me. It was a lot less creative and actually less about the fashion and more about crunching numbers and looking at data all day of what was selling and sizes. And made the hard but right decision for me to switch into publishing and take a massive pay cut about a year into my buying career, my very short buying career, and never looked back. I was, making peanuts at my first job at Marie Claire magazine when they were new in the US, and started as a marketing assistant and really worked my way up. I transitioned over to Condé Nast to work for the New Yorker, which was brilliant. Condé Nast had recently acquired this literary gem, and we're trying to make it cool and profitable for the first time in history. I worked with some of the smartest people to this day that I have ever met. Writers like Malcolm Gladwell were coming in. Our publisher was a really bright guy named David Carey, and just the teams that these people and David Remnick brought on, I feel like was just the best learning playground for me. And I spent a really great 4.5 years there, and then basically just followed around other smart publishers around the house in Condé Nast, and went to work for the Vogue Group for a few years, for Wired magazine, and ultimately Condé Nast Traveler, which was my last publication that I worked for, always on the marketing and business side, until I met an Australian, fell in love, got married, and he convinced me to move to London for 12 months. 15 years later, here I am, just finally getting back to the US and in Miami, but it was a brilliant ride. But I arrived in 2009, kind of jobless for the first time. I had never not worked in my life since I was legally allowed to, and managed to just pick up some freelance work for Condé Nast Traveler, who were doing some events in the UK and Europe. And then started freelancing and set up my own consultancy in London, working for some luxury travel brands and fashion brands. And I was pregnant with my first daughter, and I guess I had gotten really into cold pressed juices and plant-based milks back in New York when I was working and traveling, and flying all over the place for Condé Nast. And after a journey of being unwell, these were kind of products that were easily accessible to me and helped me regain my health, and got really frustrated, particularly when I was pregnant, that I couldn't find organic cold pressed juices and good plant-based milks without tons of sugar additives that were made fresh. Yeah, I sat on my sofa kind of in between consulting and prenatal yoga classes, talking to other moms who were feeling really low, and started to make cold pressed juices in my flat. And my kind of baby present to myself after my first daughter, Belle, was born, was to import a cold pressed juicer from the US. And I think I spent equal amounts on shipping than I did on the juicer. But yeah, that was really when I just, it started to keep me up at night, that if I didn't create a brand or product that made these products the way I wanted them made, to the highest integrity, that someone else was going to do it, and I would spend the rest of my life regretting it. So Plenish was born on my, maternity leave for my consulting gig, and I never looked back.
And your working life during New York, I think I read an interview where you said it was incredibly hectic, relatively jet set lifestyle. You weren't the healthiest you'd been. You were quite run down. Is New York where you first encountered cold pressed juice, where you certainly had the advice that you needed to have more plant-based products?
Yeah, so I kept getting strep throat. It wasn't very sexy or exotic, but it just really knocked me on my back, over and over again, to the point where doctors kept giving me antibiotics, and I had unknowingly really destroyed all the friendly and good microbiome bacteria in my gut, and just my immunity was on the floor. So I ended up seeking help from a nutritional therapist, who put me on a juice cleanse, because my system was just really not efficient at all at absorbing nutrients anymore, no matter what I was eating. And it wasn't a weight loss journey for me. It was more about just a really easy way to assimilate nutrients into my body. And very long story short, it was what really helped me regain my health. And I just started, there were lots of cold pressed juice bars popping up around New York, delivery services. Even, and I traveled a lot to the West Coast, to Los Angeles there as well. These types of products were easily accessible. So they just became a staple of my life. I had a cold pressed juice. I wasn't making them. I just bought them before I left my house in the morning. And I kind of knew filled my body up with, kilos of organic green veg. And I just felt better and slowly but surely regained my health. So yeah, that not having that in the UK was, it felt like a bit of you know, just a handicap. And I started making my own, not at the level because I didn't have the
Mm.
machinery. But yeah, that was really the big eye opener. I was my first customer that didn't have the product that I needed.
So yeah, so your first contact with cold pressed juice was in New York, and you went through a juice cleanse, felt immediately better. So I suppose at that point, that's where that relationship sparks, where you're thinking, wow, this is an amazing thing. I felt awful before, and now this has almost changed my life, the way I feel day to day. And then you move to London. There isn't the same market, or certainly isn't the same supply of cold pressed juice in London at all. Was there a single day where you thought, actually, I should be creating something here, or was it sort of you had the idea at the back of your mind and it molds, and there was a single day where you thought, okay, let's go for it, but you've been thinking about it for a long time?
Yeah, I guess I don't really have a back of my mind.
Okay.
Everything kind of stays in the front. When I kind of had a real, a bee in my bonnet about it, and it frustrated me immediately. I guess the only thing that changed is it really started to keep me up at night once I had my daughter because I needed it more than ever. I wanted to start working again. I was not sleeping well. It was, I wasn't flying, but I had other physical stresses and mental stresses that I could see that, I could find myself in a similar health downward spiral. And that was where I kind of really said, all right, I started talking to people, I started making them for myself. I had a nice network of other new moms who equally wanted something similar, and I started making it for them and getting really positive feedback, and started making it for their husbands who were while they were on maternity leave working in big banks down in the city. And I started to get phone calls for people like, hey, my wife
Oh.
passed along these juices, can you make me six, can you actually make 30 of them for my whole trading desk? And at this point I was like, okay, this is I'm not doing this all pro bono. Clearly there's a market for this. There's other really busy people like me who value their health, who don't have the products that they need, and these juices made them feel great. And I kind of put a pause on everything, and yeah, I tapped into some of my connections back in New York to put together the Plenish brand. I had the name before I had the business, because for me it was about being forward thinking, not getting to that point where you were really run down and needed to replenish yourself. It was about understanding the cadence of your lifestyle and knowing that you had something big to do, and you needed to fuel yourself properly. So that was really how it started. And I really took a pause to make sure that I got the brand and the branding and all of the things that I had learned throughout my marketing career to really put together the Plenish brand in a considered way.
And without knowing, or maybe with knowing, you say you got orders for 30 for an entire trading desk, or a team in a corporate office. That almost is that demand validation, where there are those signs and those traits that this is a good idea, because suddenly you're getting all these calls that, can you make this extra batch? These people are really interested. They're, I suppose, really strong signs that there was a real need for Plenish.
Yeah, and I also had seen the future a little bit in what was
Mm.
going on in the US. So it didn't feel entirely risky to know that this was a product, a service that was needed and valued by customers. With in a New York isn't so different from London. The customers and our needs and our lifestyles didn't differ that much. So I could really easily see how the usage and the appreciation of these products would transfer.
I've got two slightly health-based questions before we go into the key components of the first 100 days, Cara, if that's okay.
Sure.
Mainly selfishly, because I was reading up last night. I was thinking, like, what is the answer to this? And I was like, oh, I can just ask Cara tomorrow.
Mhm.
So the first is, and just going back to New York, let's say you were feeling run down. You went on this juice cleanse after the recommendation from seeing a specialist. What is it specifically about just drinking cold pressed juice, like, on a technical level, that changed how you feel?
I guess the science of juicing, I mean,
Yeah.
science, I'm using this term very loosely, but you put a piece of produce into a juicer and you're removing a lot of the fiber. Um, there's pros and cons to that, right? If you're juicing oranges or apples or just fruits, that fiber slows down the release of sugar. So it's very different eating an apple versus drinking an apple juice. That was not what I was trying to achieve. Um, the Plenish ethos and juicing, as it's been known in the health world, is not about juicing fruit. It's about juicing lots of high quality green vegetables. So in one glass of juice, you might press 3 kilos of organic kale, celery, spinach, ginger, cucumber into one glass. And if you tried to eat that, I challenge you. I think you'll have a really tired jaw and sore tummy. It's really hard to cram all of those nutrients into your body. It's also really much easier for your body to absorb those nutrients. So what it does is kind of gives you, almost like a shot of energy, of nutrients. There's lots of vitamins like B12 and K that are in these um, leafy greens or folic acid. For me, when I was pregnant, that was important, and it just makes you feel, buzzy almost without really taxing your digestive system too much.
And then the second point is, and this actually could be a takeaway already, is that there were two core components from what I could see as to why you wanted to start Plenish. First of all, is, I think, as you've said, you'd seen the future where this
Mhm.
was clearly picking up in the US. The US often leads first in many things. In the UK, it wasn't a thing as much, so you saw an opportunity. And second, you felt very strongly about the idea. So I think the two together, if I'm getting this right, were really the activation energy for you wanting to start Plenish.
Yeah, I guess just the only tweak on the second
Yeah.
point is that I thought for sure someone else could do it. I just didn't think that they would do it right and at the level of integrity that I wanted
Mm.
to introduce this category with. And I guess we can chat about it later. But my mission and my ethos was always about using organic produce without all the pesticides that promote sustainable growing. It was about really making sure that they were low sugar, either no sugar or very low sugar, and really, offer that service of health to somebody. There were other green juices. I'm using air quotes. There were really successful brands like Innocent and Naked who had a
Mm.
green juice, but they were all heat pasteurized, kiwi and apple and banana, and they had almost as much sugar as a can of Coke. So for me, it
Wow.
was about being really, um, really just having a real high integrity, being really, intentful and meaningful about the type of product and how you wanted people to feel and what my whole purpose of existing and why I wanted to even bother starting a brand is because I really thought I could help and make a difference in people's lives.
And maybe stupid question, but why didn't the likes of Innocent do what you did? Was it just too expensive? They just didn't care as much. People didn't want it as much at the time. Like, why do you think you were one of the first individuals to make juice in such a way?
I think it comes down to, one of the points that I know I sent you that I wanted to talk
Yes.
about, which is really setting up your mission and your purpose. And, the things that we had written on the Plenish wall were always organic. always going to be, low sugar, always going to have health and our consumer first. So with that, it meant we always were going to use organic produce. We weren't creating sweet drinks. And, that comes at a cost to price, both to the business and the consumer. But it also comes with a much harder journey. It's much harder to convince someone to drink a glass of kale and ginger and spinach than it is
Mm.
to convince someone to drink something really sweet and easy to transition from an orange juice or an apple juice. So, ultimately that was why I believe that they didn't or couldn't create similar products. Down the line, Innocent tried. They tried to do a healthier green juice, but again, it was mostly apple or mostly carrot and orange, and they didn't work. It wasn't what people wanted and really knew of the Innocent brand. And they had a brilliant business. It was just a very different, if you probably sat the three boys at Innocent or myself down on day one, our vision and our purpose would have been very different missions. So I think that's, I guess, what kept us you know, on similar paths, but ultimately very different end directions.
How do you think the missions differ?
I can't speak for Innocent. I know
Yeah.
they were about taste. That was kind of what drove them first, taste and
Yeah.
happiness. I'm sure there's probably 5 years ago, 8 years ago, I would have known it word for word. But for Plenish, it was really about health first. It was about health and it was about wellness. And with health, it limited what we could do in terms of including sweet ingredients to our products. And that was a much harder road. It was a much, this was really a new
Mm.
category in the UK, and it wasn't an easy one. It wasn't the kind of thing where you could sample, give someone a sample in Whole Foods and you knew for sure that they were going to buy it. There had to be a story that went with it, an education, and someone who was willing to, fork over 6 pounds for a
Mm.
250 ml juice. It was a big commitment from a consumer. So we really had to work very hard at education.
I mean, you do touch on that. So we mentioned, I mean, you've gone through, take a long-term view, define what you want to get to. And we can probably come back to that in a bit. But you also say nail down what you value, what value you're adding to people's lives. Many times founder-led businesses are started from a personal passion or frustration. So make what is important to you is important to others, and that you can do it differently. And if you're not doing differently, do it better.
Yeah. I think, that was always what I asked myself. It's probably the number one piece of advice. I work with a lot of founders starting, in early stage businesses now. And, the first question I ask is, why do you want to do this? If the answer is because I think there's great money in it, you know, I really send people back to the drawing board, because that's not what's going to get you out of bed every morning after, years and years of hard slog and lots of no's and punches in the face and lots of big exciting wins too, but more punches and hard slog days than the celebratory ones. And really understanding, I always said at Plenish, we knew exactly what we were doing for consumers and what we were adding to their lives. We were, making sure that they had the best products, better than you could make it at home, right? Because we used the best produce, organic, no pesticides, very low sugar. And I felt really, really good every night going to sleep that if someone had a Plenish product, they were probably healthier than they were the day before. Those are the types of people I tried to recruit too, that type of mission and driver was what got people out of bed in the morning. Because other than that, it can be hard. It can be really hard work. And, if you are, you don't always have to do something new. If, you're in, some people say, oh, you can't enter a category when it's crowded, or you shouldn't, or you shouldn't enter a category if that whole category is declining. But, I think you can, as long as you're really clear on what you're doing differently or what you're doing better. And so, I looked at juice, and it was a big, big category. When I joined, it was still in growth. Innocent was flying, Naked was
Mm.
flying. Wasn't really through halfway through of my 9-year Plenish journey that, you know, Jamie Oliver and lots of other influencers and sugar tax started really
Mm.
getting vocal about sugar. And there was a big pullback from consumers and then the supermarkets on juice as we knew it before Plenish. So, we really saw the pendulum swing a little bit in terms of sugary drinks growing when I started the business, to a point where the category was declining. And a lot of investors said, I don't want to invest in a declining category. Juice is declining. But then when you start to really look at the data, and we broke it down, yes, juice was declining, double digits. But what was increasing was wellness and drinks like ours, that were growing triple digits. So, we saw the same thing in dairy, when I launched the plant-based milks. Um, Dairy was a um, you know, significantly declining category.
Mm.
It was a huge category in the grocers. The grocers were slashing merchandising space, but we saw a sliver of hope with brands like Alpro, who, in my opinion, were creating a really bad product, filled with oils and gums and stabilizers, nothing I would put in my body or give to my kids. And we had a plant-based milk that had the same ethos as our juices. It was, if it was the almond milk, it was almond and water and a dash of sea salt, grown organically from sustainable sources. And we put it into, some of our grocery partners and started to see incredible growth. And it was a glimmer of hope. It took years to build, and people didn't get it at first. And it had other challenges. It didn't froth in coffee like the milks with oil. But ultimately, we stayed the course and continued to be 100% dedicated to that original mission about creating products, that were low in sugar and free from stabilizers and oils and all of the nasties. And ultimately it worked. And we started to gain more merchandising space and more shelf space in the grocers. Grocers started taking away space from the traditional milk and dairy products and giving them to us. It was, things do change. And I think if you are honestly and authentically doing something better, and I really mean that, no one could say that this wasn't being done better, um, or it wasn't being done differently, which we were checking the boxes, then I don't think that we could have really changed the tide in those categories when we did.
And it goes into the second point. So you you said be crystal clear and document your purpose and mission. I suspect that if you didn't have a clear mission and the core beliefs that you've also mentioned in the first point about wanting to improve people's lives, like juice improved your life, I suspect it would have been far likelier you would have given up during the hard early years where people didn't quite get it. Then if you do have that core belief, that's what kept you going. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, 100%. You know, most of it, I mean, when we started, and I would say, for any founder who's really trying to do something new and different, particularly if you're talking to retail buyers, no one wants to take a risk. No buyer is KPI to take risks.
Mm.
Um, they don't want, there's no big bets, and it's all about profits and slightly incremental growth. So you really have to work hard to, and really believe in what you're selling. And it sometimes it would have been easier. It would have been easier for us to, be cheaper because we were at a huge premium to, at the time. I mean, things have evened out now, but at the time when we launched, our milks were at a huge premium to Alpro. And some of the big grocers didn't want to look at us. They didn't believe customers would pay more. And that didn't believe that the customers would value that. And we really, we had the benefit of having our own direct to consumer channel that we, just year after year could show the data points of how fast it was growing and putting it on Amazon. Brands have a lot of opportunity now to sell directly, even um, while you're trying to convince, retail buyers why your product is better and that actually the consumers value that and are willing to pay for it.
And the third point, so you mentioned take a long-term view, define where you want to get to, and just linking that into the first and second point about the mission and then wanting to improve people's lives. Did you have them all in place before you actually started Plenish, or was it something that you crafted in the early stages, but after you had started?
Look, I'm a strategist and a marketer at heart, right? That was my training. So I think for me, yes, that's how I started. When I work with founders now, this is kind of very similar to the work that I lay out in the the format that I work with founders. I think that long-term view and your mission are key in helping you steer the course, because there are lots of opportunities that come up, um, particularly as you start to see some success, and you really have to know where you want to get to. So for example, when we launched, I talked to a few retailers. No one wanted to hear from us. I was this, kind of nobody American who was bringing people weird tasting juices that were very expensive with a short shelf life. And milk that was made out of cashews. People looked at me like, I belonged like, in a farmer's market. So I set up online, and this was the early days for us of D2C. And um, that being said, once I launched online, and we did that for about a year and a half, we got the business to about £1 million, but I just couldn't see how we could grow anymore. There were only so many customers who were willing, to buy a minimum of 6 juices, and we had to ship it chilled, and the supply chain wasn't as advanced from like a parcel sending point of view as it is now. And when we started to innovate and launch the milks, the long life milks that now are in all the supermarkets, um, it was really about making sure that we had those first few points nailed down. How do we innovate, knowing that we still want to add health and well-being to people's lives, but being really crystal clear about ticking all those boxes of using organic produce and products, making sure that we're sourcing sustainably, that we're not adding sugar. And with milks, we even kind of, rather than take away from the original purpose, we started adding. But we worked so hard on those juices, and it paid off building our authenticity, that people really trusted us, that actually when we launched milks, it felt easy. And I said it felt, juice always felt like pushing on a really, really tough door with a big headwind at you. When we launched milks, it was like pushing on an open door. People got it immediately. We had built a little bit of street cred from the juices, and all of a sudden had a product that we could compete in a price point ish. We were still at a significant premium, but had a longer shelf life. It was ambient, and consumers got it immediately. So that one, I guess in terms of that long-term view of what we wanted to add to consumers' life and the boxes we needed to tick, that was already set up for us from day one. And it made innovation, it made product launching, it made the sell-in, it made the consumer marketing all that much easier. So it's why I think the hard work at the beginning of really setting your parameters for your brand, even more important, because it will only make your life easier as the business grows and develops.
Clearly the philosophy was there, and it makes complete sense to me. The fact you have that core belief nailed down and your why nailed down, it certainly helps you stay the course, because as you say, there could be distractions as you progress and as you start being a bit more successful, having those core beliefs and is something that you can tether yourself to. I'd be interested to know, and just going back to day zero, I suppose, if I was to spend the first month with you from day zero of starting Plenish all the way up to the first month, what would I have seen day to day? What would you have been up to?
The first month I was working from home with a newborn, um, who was a month old. So you would have seen a really tired, haggard looking woman,
Sure.
who was trying to make the most of nap time, and the evenings when I was awake. And it was really about um, it was about creating a document. I mean, it was nothing sexy or groundbreaking. It was a Word document that had all of this, all of these kind of goals that it almost looked like an outline. And that's how I work. That's how I roll with everything. I need to write things down on a piece of paper. I need to type it up. I need to edit it. And then I need to print it out and post it somewhere where I have access to. So there would have been a lot of that. And then there would have been a lot of looking at and working with the designer on the brand and the brand world, and developing the logo and the packaging. The whole experience, because we were a direct to consumer business, of how people were going to receive our products. A lot of talking to farmers for the first time in my life. I mean, I was a New York City girl who, worked at Condé
Mm.
Nast. I knew nothing about starting a fresh, supply chain of veg. I started when I was making them at home, just ordering from Ocado when Ocado was launching. So I really had to, when I started, ordering big quantities of produce, I walked around to my local farmers markets and started talking to farmers. Um, I started calling farms. I called Ocado. I think I called a produce buyer and asked, I couldn't find a source for romaine lettuce in winter. And I actually, I remember my mom bought me, because I would be like, I can't believe I never thought. I created a juice with romaine lettuce as a base, and I didn't know it's not available all winter long. And as a joke, my mom sent me a poster of, like, all the European vegetables and fruits and where they grow in what season. It was like a piece of art, but it was very helpful. So I was like, oh, France. Okay, I need to find some romaine lettuce in France. It was baby jam, actually. That's what I found. So yeah, it was just really piecing together all of the information on how the heck am I going to make this product? The stuff like the brand and my purpose and my mission, that was easy for me. I could
Mm.
bang that out in probably, a day and refine that. The stuff that was really hard was putting together a supply chain, and which was kind of the fourth point I sent you, is just make sure you can actually make your product, if things start going well. So once I had everything together and I had product ready to sell, you've got to, the website was ready to launch. It was a big day. And this may not have been the first 30 days. I may be somewhere into
Mm.
60 or 90, but, I basically just called everyone I knew, and tried to network, because I really didn't have, I was new to the UK. I wasn't, I didn't have a long career there. I was just consulting for a handful of people. But I used all of my contacts. I was a member of Soho House. I called them and said, hey, I've got this new business. Let me show it to you. Could I send an email out to the London base, or this was before they had a portal of offers. Somehow they agreed. I reached out to the yoga studio that I was doing my prenatal yoga classes with when I was pregnant. I said, will you send an email out? And I kind of really used every single contact I had like that. The people down at the bank that I had made some free juices for, a few months before. And I said, hey, if I make a flyer, will you distribute these around the bank? And I used things like that. And I launched the website at midnight one night. And the next morning I had an order. And it kind of just, that is a very surreal moment. And I was like, I don't even know this person. This is not my mom. This is not my husband. This is a real customer that through one of these connections, saw this product. It resonated with them. They were willing to fork over 150 pounds for a 3-day cleanse. And gosh, that was probably the scariest moment, because you're like, wow, all right, I need to change this person's life. This is my first box I'm sending out. I bought some balloons and sent it via courier. Back then I was delivering in London via a rickshaw. They had I don't know if you remember, but they still exist a little bit, but they're eco couriers that would pop boxes in the back of a little cycle rickshaw, and off it went. And to be honest, we really didn't look back. And I guess to go into the next stage was, once you have customers, my phone number was on all the packaging, it was on the website. I was entirely customer service focused. And to me, I just wanted, that was part of that point one, which was adding value to consumers' lives. I wanted to have great service. And I had a newborn baby at home. That was probably my biggest challenge, which I think I'm already kind of going into point 5, which was have a plan for your personal life, which I didn't. That was the one thing I really underestimated.
Throughout that period, so let's say first 3 months or 100 days, I'm just trying to gauge, it is a job on its own having a newborn baby. And I think most mothers would say that is by itself very, very difficult. You, in addition to that, had started to create this business. And it sounds like you'd made a lot of progress, especially in the first few months. What was it like emotionally in that period? Were you just, again, appreciate you almost have two worlds you're juggling, but aside from having the newborn, were you just 100% focused and you had a whole belief in what you were doing? Or was it really up and down where you thought, am I just doing the right thing here? What happens if they don't like it? Was it more doubt led, or were you just so focused and you knew it was a good thing and you knew you wanted to change people's lives and it would work?
I guess it's an interesting question, because yes, I had lots of doubt. I never had doubt that I was going to add value to someone's life. I guess my biggest doubt was, would they like it, and would they be willing to kind of almost put an easier, cheaper option and value what I valued, which was their health and the way it was made, and all of the harder bits that took into that were involved in making the product. And it really didn't take long, because I think the benefit of launching online is that you're not dealing with anyone else's expectations other than your customers. And, I only had my consumer that bought the product to make happy. I didn't need to worry about a hurdle rate. I didn't need to worry about my retailer's margin. I only had my singular customer to focus on. And I also got immediate feedback. People were so vocal, whether it was positive or negative. Some people really couldn't handle it. They were like, this is gross. I don't want it. And I would say, thank you for trying, and I would give them some tips on how to, put it over ice, drink it with a straw, add some sparkling water. And some people would get over the hurdle, and then, green juice was a part of their life forever, and would write me 3 months later and say, thank you for getting me over the hump. People would call me on a cleanse that they had a headache, or they were so hungry and this was too hard. And, I would give them a piece of advice. I would say, go for a walk. And if you still want to have, an avocado, then go out, do it. But I think people were just so grateful and interactive in the early days that I really, really learned so much. And I was everything. I was, not just the CEO of my business. I was the receptionist. I was the customer service person. I was the supply chain manager. And I took all of that information, I didn't hire someone for almost a year. Um, so the first person I hired was a nanny. And that was really kind of my fifth point of making that plan for your personal life. I really hadn't thought of it. I really hadn't thought about the fact that once I had active customers, once you actually launch the business and you're selling, life doesn't go back. This is not just on your own schedule. My schedule was no longer my own. Because if a delivery went wrong after work and you had to chase it or send something out, I had to be available. And I treated my customers like I was a PA for, Beyonce. And I needed childcare to do that. So that was really my biggest investment in the business, really was helping me get childcare during the days where our, customer service phone number was open. um, and it helped me just, you know, it helped me do what I needed to do without the stress of disappointing a customer or disappointing a newborn baby.
How did you balance the two, even at the beginning, though? As practically, were you just tired the whole time, or you just found this magic way of at some points during the day, allocating time to a newborn, and then in the evenings, perhaps? Like, how did you actually navigate that at the beginning?
Well, I mean, before the business launched, I was on my own schedule, right? I
Yeah.
worked when the baby was sleeping or at
Mm.
night. But once, I have 6.5 years between my two daughters, and I always say Plenish was my middle child. Um, it was by design. I couldn't do it all. And I don't really, I always hated that word of balance. I feel like it's a question
Mm.
that's asked a lot of women and not of men. Um, because I don't think men are expected to have balance. They work when they work and they parent when they parent. And I tried just to be kind to myself and say, I'm not going to give myself any other expectations other than I need to work when I need to work. And then I'm a better mother for working because I enjoy it and I believed in what I was doing. So I don't feel like I had a lot of balance. Um, I felt like there were time. I think you can do it all, but just not all at once. And again, I work with a lot of female founders. That's what I always say. It's a lot of people have that question. I don't think it's fair to ask that question because it doesn't. I don't believe it exists. If you really are serious about launching a business, um, there's going to be times when you are working incredibly hard and giving it all to your business, and you'll feel guilty. I did about not being as present at with your children. But then there's times that my family or my children needed me over the 10 years, and um, I I felt like I wasn't as present in the business, and things had to slow down. And that's the reality of it. As an early stage founder, when you're not there, unless you have a really great co-founder or you're launching a business with a huge team and you've got a great number two, um, the energy is where you are. And at times you've got to take the pedal off of the work and put the focus on your family.
You're on the phone to Soho House and you're ringing around. You're trying to grow your network. Like at that moment, because I think I just want to try and relate it back to some of the experiences I've had. Certainly at the beginning when starting this podcast, it's quite nerve wracking, especially when you're on the phone with people trying to explain what you want to do and why you'd like them to come on. I don't know if you've had this same experience, but like, did you feel a sense of like, is this the right thing? What are they going to say? Shit, like I don't know. Or were you just like, yeah, I'm just fully focused on this. I feel so strongly about this that I don't feel nerves right now. I just know that they need it in their lives.
Yeah, there's always a little bit of nerves, but I guess I was always just nervous about someone saying no
Mm.
versus asking. And I was already thinking about, all right, if they said no, just understanding why. And then could I address those? Could I, get over that hump of why they said no, either on that call or at a later date? But gosh, you've got to really not be scared of the ask. Be scared of the no, But don't be scared of the ask, because there's just, that's just about you. And again, back to, if you really believe that you can add value to someone's life by them having your product or your service, then why would you be scared about asking? Actually, you're doing them a favor.
Yeah, I that makes complete sense. Again, it does trickle back to those first few points you've mentioned here around, wanting to improve people's lives, being crystal clear with your purpose and the long-term view. I suppose if you have those all cemented, then when you do reach out and you're trying to promote your product, especially as the website is trying to launch, that just gives you a strong foundation. And then maybe there are some no's. I suspect there were lots of no's, were there? Or
Oh my
was it
God,
mostly
there were,
received well?
400 times more no's than there are yeses. Every single retail buyer said no.
Yeah.
You know, it's, I think in today's world, which is even different than when I launched Plenish, so much is sold not directly to people. Even now when you're selling, direct to consumer on a website, it's via Google ad or via an influencer. I think the more you can do to like actually find ways to get out there and sell directly to a customer, um, the better, because that's ultimately, if you are converting a customer and you are creating a fan, that's the conviction that you need when you're going out to the naysayers. And to every retail buyer that said no, you don't need to always say thank you. You need to say, I hear you, I'm listening.
Yeah.
Here's what I've heard. Is this why? Can you just can we just confirm this is why you're saying no? And if I were able to convince you that, this reason, and this reason weren't actually a barrier, you would have listed me today. And if you can kind of get them to, almost be really sure about why they're saying no, then that gives you a job to do. And it may not be overnight. There was a big retailer that didn't list us for many, many, many years because they didn't believe that customers would pay more. And they launched lots of milk brands that, were Me Too's of Outpro, with oils, with gums, and at a similar or lower price point, and didn't list us because we were more expensive. And ultimately it was that, there was a buyer that didn't believe the premium category was going to work. And I guess where we had a major job to do, which took years, was to convince them that it wasn't about being premium, it was about being better. And if consumers wanted it organic and without oil and with more nuts, because of that, then they would pay a little bit extra. But yeah, it takes years, and I think you just have to keep your list of no's close and clear. And if they're important to convert for you for your business, then make sure you've got a strategy and a plan on how to convert those no's. I always
And
found
on
that
top,
fun.
go on. Well, and does it get easier the more no's you have to hear no, or is it just quite hard every
No,
time?
not a chance. I think if nothing else, it gets more infuriating. So you're like, but it's working.
Yeah.
It's not just me. At the beginning, you can have a little self-doubt. Oh gosh, am I crazy? Does no one really, see the value in this? Is this not helping people? But as you get on, I think, no, I don't think the no's get easier, no matter what you're doing. I don't know. For me, they didn't.
Taking all of the points and the conversation so far, I mean, we have honed in on the beginning, which is the aim of this podcast, but speeding up and going 8-9 years into the future, you reach a situation that many founders would dream of, in a way, where they've grown the business to a certain level, and then there's interest from another party to acquire the company. What was that period like where you'd learn of the interest from Britvic? Was that, and we go back to the plan at the beginning, was that always the plan at some point to sell, or was that actually a chink in the plan and you never intended for that to happen so early?
Um, I hadn't intended to sell at that point. I was looking for a strategic investor to really help us explode distribution and scale. Um, Kind of going back to what we've been talking about, I had a pretty stringent list of the type of partner that I wanted or investor that I wanted because there were things I wasn't willing to change. And um, as we started to talk to different investors, people would say, "Hey, you could really increase your margin if we just switched out of organic, or if we, reduced the nut quantity and added this filler. Have you considered this?" And those were signs to me that this wasn't the right partner. With Britvic, it was an interesting, they were certainly not the first people we talked to about investing, but there was something different about them in that they were they really appreciated and respected the journey we had been on. And I think one of the reasons they liked Plenish and our team is because of that commitment. And I think they were really, they weren't a highly acquisitive business. They were looking to get into wellness and really liked what the brand stood for. And I think valued the trust that we had built up with consumers. So when I met them, it was full on lockdown during COVID. I never met them face to face. And during that time period, everything just kind of slowed down, right? People stopped investing, people stopped meeting entirely. And because of that, we just talked for a very long time and got to know them, and they got to know us and our team. And it was quite collaborative in terms of, okay, how could this work? And yeah, I think, although I wasn't looking, that the process wasn't started looking for a buyer, what ended up working for them was to acquire the company entirely versus making an investment. That was what worked for their model. And I felt really strongly that this was a great home for the brand because they committed to keeping on the path that we had set. So yeah, that was, it made it a bit of an some parts easier, some part harder transition as we integrated, because I stayed on for 18 months after the sale. But yeah, did that answer the question?
You did.
Okay.
And feel free not to answer this. I never quite know where the line is drawn. But do you still feel emotionally attached to the brand now, even though you're not involved, I don't think, at all, or certainly day to day?
Of course I do. I mean, it's been interesting. I left the country. I left the UK a year ago, so Plenish isn't here in the US. But I'm back in London often, and yeah, I'm always popping into Tesco or Whole Foods, and it's exciting. Yeah, it's really exciting to see the products on the shelves. And there was a piece of innovation that we were working on, before the acquisition that got launched with the barista range. And we always really believed in shots, but just, as a small business, didn't have the bandwidth to do everything between the juices and the milks. We launched shots, but it was really hard to support them. And Britvic have done an amazing job, and they're in Cafe Nero and just killing it in terms of distribution. So that's really exciting to see. It was like having a baby. I always equate it because it launched right after I had my first daughter, and I waited a while to have a second one. So yeah, there's definitely an emotional piece there. I think it would have been really hard had I not believed in Britvic's direction, and that's made it a lot easier.
I suppose it's like having a baby, seeing it grow up and then leave home in 2021 or 2022.
Exactly. But I think that, they've done a really good job to date of keeping in the line of what the business really was started to do.
Well, I can certainly vouch for the fact I must admit, I spoke to my mother about Plenish before we spoke. I think it was last night. And I think she has at least two of the milks in the fridge right now. So clearly it's,
Excellent. Good woman.
yeah, it's clearly doing well in our household. We've spoken about wanting to improve people's lives. We've spoken about having a clear purpose, having a long-term view, making sure you can actually make the product, and then making sure you have a plan for your personal life. Is there anything I haven't mentioned or anything that you wanted to speak about that you haven't had the chance to?
Um, no, I think it's just setting your expectations for yourself and being kind to yourself because it's hard. You get a lot of punches thrown at you, and you just, even if you don't believe in yourself naturally, you've got to just kind of fake it and make it and stop to appreciate the view every once in a while. And as you start to build a team as well, making sure that you guys as a team stop and look back and appreciate the view because you're always looking at the future. You're always looking for growth. And it always feels so slow. Even if you've doubled the size of your business in the year, it's still, for me, and I know for lots of other founders, it feels slow because they all want to be, a 10, 20, 30 million pound business overnight. But don't forget to celebrate the wins and really recognize for yourself and your team how far you have come because those moments are really important.
I couldn't agree more. It's so easy, especially when you make progress to get used to the new normal where, you've moved to a certain level and then you think, well, I haven't made progress. It feels as normal as it did before. But in reality, if you look at where you've come from even a month ago or a year ago, it's totally different. But it's hard to have that perspective in the moment. I think to end, Cara, I always think, like, how do I end this thing? What questions shall I ask at the end? And actually today, weirdly, I just wrote this question on a bit of paper at work. And I was thinking about it. I'd be interested to know, before you started Plenish, and then I suppose the change after you sold, how do you view, and this is quite a deep question, but how do you view the world? And an example that I was thinking of is you could view the world as an optimistic place where you can create anything and anything is possible and every day is important and special. Others would view the world as like a very dangerous, negative place and a very cautious, risk averse. Others would be, quite not risk averse, but they would be willing to take some risk, but also try and balance things out with other components. Like how do you view the world before you started Plenish, and did that change during and after?
Yeah, I think it definitely helped me believe that anything is possible. Um, I followed a traditional path before Plenish. I went to university. I worked my way up in a corporate environment at Condé Nast. And then everything changed. I married an Australian. I moved to a different country in the UK and I knew nobody. And in a way, I wonder had I not made that move and not had people that I respected and worried about what they thought about me. I had a lot less fear, I think, about failing because this was a new place and I had everything to learn. I didn't feel like I had a ton to lose. And, I was for the first time not in a corporate environment. I was consulting and had my own clients. So I think that move combined with actually creating something from nothing, which was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. It was so hard and so tiring, but it was so wonderful and so much fun, so enriching. And I met amazing people, and I made lifelong friends and learned entirely new skills that you had to go out there and figure stuff out on your own. I failed a ton, way more times than I succeeded at things. And I guess at the end of that, there's obviously a reward that makes you look at like, okay, well, what's next? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's frightening and it's exciting. But again, it kind of makes you feel like there's a lot more possibilities. And
Very
why,
exciting.
and one of the questions is like, why not me? At the beginning you say like, could I
Cool.
really do this? But now, just asking the question, why not me? Lots of other people do stuff that they've never done before and taken risks and tried new things, and worst comes to worst, it doesn't work. Big whoop.
I love that take. Cara's genuinely inspirational. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I feel
Thank
like
you.
I feel like it's yeah, I feel like you've broken it down really well, and you just it's that confidence and energy, and as you've just said, like why not? Why not you? Why not me? I feel like yeah, that's just such an empowering message. So I just want to thank you for your time. Yeah, it's been wonderful.
Pleasure. Thank you, Will.